Lita, hi, thank you everybody, and thank you for your patience. I'm going to be talking about a program that we've been working with at the University of Puerto Rico, Mayaguez. And the objectives of this presentation is to briefly explain the service learning model of the University Institute for Community Development at Mayaguez, Puerto Rico, and present the methods of collecting evidence of compliance with the best practice for service learning, the student learning objectives, of the Art and Science College at the University of Puerto Rico, Mayaguez. The University of Puerto Rico, Mayaguez is a public institution. It's funded by the government of Puerto Rico. And I don't know if there are some people here that's international in this group, but Puerto Rico is a territory of the United States of America. And um, it has a public education system. And we collect evidence for the principle of active participation and focus on community needs of participative action research by the model. We want to present tools for collecting evidence about student learning, present preliminary results of the assessment, discuss the strengths of the IUDC model for SL, for service learning, discuss the changes that will be implemented, and include into the manual, recommend and present tools, everything in less than 15 minutes. Well, the educational approach of the service learning is an educational approach that integrates community service with teaching and learning, and it's based on student participation in community activities as part of their academic exercise. They learn and develop skills through practical experience while making a significant contribution to the community environment. It promotes civic responsibility, social awareness, and commitment to service, and allows educational institutions to respond in an integrated manner to the dimensions of knowledge, development of attitudes and values in the students, and contributing to the community issues we have. The service learning model at the Institute in Puerto Rico was established in 2003, and it's a bridge between the university and 65 to 150, depends on the semester, communities of the island. It offers practical opportunities for students in an interdisciplinary area, and it's a model that meets the conditions to be considered service learning. It incorporates faculty, students, student mentors, and community stakeholders. And we diagnose the needs of vulnerable population sectors and seek strategies to meet those needs. Students involved in three ways: voluntary as part of a course, or enrolling in a course for that. And the practice includes a protocol that is a manual that is equivalent to an extended syllabus, a working model, teaching strategies, variety of teaching strategies, an interdisciplinary experience, assessment methods, and evaluation instruments. Um, the participatory action research integrates scientific methodology with the ethical experience of action. I mean, it's a model that does research in the community, but it works in finding the solutions to the problems or the needs that we find in the community. And it's participatory because the people, the groups inside of the community participate actively in the organization of the research, design of the research, in the instruments that are going to be used, and in the solutions that we find. And the students learn that when they begin, they first take a seminar which includes different parts of the model and some techniques and ethics, and all they need in order to start. They're assigned to communities and get a mentor and community teacher. The groups of students are from these different disciplines. We have We can have in one community students from the engineering department, students from the agricultural department, from nursing department, psychology, social sciences, and they all work together in order to attend to the needs of the community. They get a mentor that is a senior student and a community teacher, and they meet with the mentor and other students to do to work on a mission, vision, and a goal. And then they do research, reviewing available primary data. Then they meet with the community leaders, create rapport with them, and collaborate in planning how they are gonna approach the community. They visit the community on different hours, write down observations, meet with members, plan for primary data recollection. They get the data, discuss the data with the members of the community, and prepare a final activity that responds to the needs of the community. The purpose of this research was to assess the IUDC program, taking into consideration five elements. First, if the program was compliant with the best practice for service learning, if it was compliant to the general education student learning objectives of the College of Arts and Sciences in the University of Puerto Rico and Mayaguez, to see if it was compliant with the paradigm of the participatory action research, if the students were compliant with the program requirements, and what was the quality of the manual. That happens because as the institute was organized in 2003, we have been working with all of the needs of the communities, but it was never assessed. Um, what did we find? The next four slides are gonna be just for you to be able to see what we did, but I'm not gonna discuss them because we don't have time for that. But actually, we did measure the compliance with the best practice of service learning, and we found that the model is compliant with all the best practice in service learning that are presented in literature by Hornet and Poulson in 1989 and Howard in 2001. The model is also compliant with most of the student learning objectives of the Arts and Science College at the University of Puerto Rico, Mayaguez, with the exception of four objectives, but it's no problem because what the university asks is that for the general programs that it only has to be compliant with three of them, and we already are compliant with 10. In terms of the compliance with PIR, R with action research, we measured it, trying to understand if the students really were having the interests of the community as part of their interventions. What we found out was that the activities that the students did organize, half of them were based on the needs of the community, but half of them were not based in the principles of the community. So we knew that we have to do something about that. We were doing the study during COVID-19 shutdown. So we thought that it was maybe because of the shutdown. So we analyzed the practices before that and the practice, and then afterwards, a year after the lockdown was done, we analyzed the data, and we found out that there were no significant difference in the proportion. They were 50-50 in all the three times. So it's a problem with something in the program, not with the historical moment. Another finding in the student compliance with the program, this is the table that shows which parts we studied, but what we find is that the program, the students were compliant with 83% of the things that were asked in the syllabus or the manual. So we have a problem in that area because we need to attend to that. So it's very interesting because at the same time that we were working on the assessment, students were doing some kind of action by themselves with synchronicity with what we were doing, and they were doing voluntarily, and they initiated it, and they evaluated the manual, and they also gave us some recommendations for the program that maybe tells us why we had the problems that we saw. And what they told us was that they did not have a um, clear um, how you call it, clear instruction, clear directions for the program. And they asked us to rewrite the manual to provide clear instructions. They told us that we need to avoid repetition and explain each data collection technique thoroughly. They told us to write the manual in a step by step style, to include links to videos for students to find who find auditory learning more accessible, to convert the compulsory end of semester activity into an optional exercise dependent on the phase of the community. That they say that the reason why the activities don't match the needs of the community is that they have to uh, be compliant with that part of the manual, and they weren't able to be compliant to the compliant. They were supposed they wrote a report on that, but we weren't able to get the report in order to give more instructions about that, because changes of student status of the leader of the assessment of the manual. And we have been trying to recover the report for the analysis, but we are working on that so that we can have more information. But understanding that we don't have that information, we decided that we are going to work uh, in other things that I'm going to tell you afterwards. The trends that we find when we talk about the conclusions is that the IUDC model follows 100% of the best practices for service learning. We found out that the IUCD model complies with 71% of the student learning objectives, and there is an 83% of compliance with the requirements of the IUDC model uh, in the syllabus. Um, Areas for growth. Well, the percent of activities not directed by the community is approximately 50%. That questions the internalization of the paradigm in the students. The students agree that there's a lack of clarity in the manual. There is a lack of assessment tools to provide an earlier and easier follow up of the process in the future. And student question the lack of integration in the interventions from one semester to the other. Um, what we are planning to do in order to attend to those limitations first is do some changes on the manual. In the assessment tools, we need to develop a tool to assess the quality of the manual that includes clarity, organization, steps by step instructions, and suitability. we need to develop a focal group with the students to comment on the areas of improve. So we are gonna give the instrument to the students, and they're gonna assess the manual, and then we are gonna work with focal groups in order to find out what are the comments of the students. And we also are gonna add some assessment tools that we already created in order to assess the student learning process. We also want to assess the course, and we are doing that with two instruments that we created already in order to do that. What other changes to the manual we are going to be working with? We're going to, I'm sorry, my English sometimes get a little um, tongue tied. I
It's
get
very
a
good. I
little
just
tongue.
want to remind you the time is expiring, but your English is
Okay.
great.
The changes to the manual is adding an introduction to the model chapter with links to training videos, adding explanation of the PAR paradigm, clarifying the evaluation criteria for the students, and use the results of the quality of manual assessment and focal groups to edit the different sections of the manual. In terms of the conclusion, this research has provided information about the strengths of the IUCD model, showing us that it is an important resource in service learning and needs to be included in the core courses needed to comply with the student learning outcomes for the College of Arts and Science. The result of the assessment also provide guides in order to determine which areas needs to be enhanced to have a better service learning experience that satisfies the needs of our changing student body and communities. This preliminary report informs future assessment and the creation of a manual for the implementation that can be used to replicate the model in other centers for education. We can't forget that the assessment exercise is a continuous one, and the manual, as a result, will be a living document. This evaluation process enriches the IUCD model, adapting it to the new challenge that have emerged after hurricanes, earthquake, pandemics, and their consequence on migration, displacement, dismantling of public institutions, and their effects on poverty and inequality in Puerto Rico. Continuing to study service learning experiences while considering diversity from a decolonizing perspective is necessary. Um, Follow-up research, we need to do some research on we found out, ¿verdad? Um, with the results of this preliminary study, that we need to research on program continuity with the communities, research on the best participatory practice to student learning in the communities, and we need to produce a ground theory for the student learning participatory research within the colonial research within our the colonial position to decolonize learning. Well, thank you. I want to thank you for listening to me. That's all for now, and I also want to give thanks to my colleague and friend who have worked with me with this program, Dr. Reinaldo Rosado Silva. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's quite interesting. Well, we heard that everything changed during the pandemic, but you found one thing that did not change, right? The
Yes, the kind of the amount of activities that were organized by the students and by
Thank you.
the community, telling us that they had a vertical perspective yet.
Thank you. Well, I guess I'll get started right in then. I'm talking about seasonal variation in economic preferences. And I want to start off, and I'm in Alaska, and I started thinking about this when I appeared there back in 2009. It was quite a difference, the way the sun worked up there. I want to just run through a quick set of questions about how we actually elicit economic preferences. So here's an example, comparing two bundles of goods, bundle A and bundle B. We ask someone, well, what do you prefer? And let's say they say we prefer A. So we'll change the question. We'll give them another question, sweeten the pot, so to speak, and ask them now, what do you prefer, A or B? They might say A, we'll do it again. They say A, we do it again. They still say A. We don't have any kind of constraints. We do it again. We can keep doing this as much as we need to. They still say A. They're real Snickers fans. Finally, we add another, and then they say, you know what? I'm indifferent between A or B. It's the same to me. So that, excuse me. So that's what we're looking for. Some kind of change from I like A, I like A, I like A to maybe I like B, or the other alternative is, yeah, it's the same to me. So when we're thinking about trade-offs and comparisons, we're looking for this point of indifference, and that works for exchange, and you can think of prices in that context. Here's another type of questionnaire when we think about now or later. And this, you can think of these numbers in option A and B as dollars. You can get $8 today or $7 30 days out. Which do you prefer? Most everyone says A. If they don't, we want to talk to them and find out why. So we do the same kind of thing with option B, adding some money with each choice. And at some point, we expect they're likely to switch over and say, okay, you know what, I'll wait 30 days to get $12 instead of 8, they might say, or people will say different things, of course. So from that, we get a sense of their sort of intertemporal preferences, their rate of discount. We can calculate. It's something very private and personal for people. And we can do the same thing with respect to risk preferences. So for example, you can get $7 for sure, or you can get 15.40 or 40 cents, but only 10% chance of 15.40. We think most people will say option A, right? Let me get 7 for sure. But we keep adding to the percentage of getting the high number. In fact, down at the bottom, it's 100%. So we think if they haven't switched off over to B, again, we want to talk to them and find out why. I mean, they're not paying attention. Plainly, $15.40 is better than 7. So that's kind of the essential elements of economic rationality when we're eliciting preferences. And now I want to talk, and it's a big issue to think about whether they in fact are stable for people. The whole field of behavioral economics looks for is in a sense founded on the idea that they might not be, and they can be affected by lots of different things. So we have basically 4 types of economic preferences over goods, like the candy bars, risk and time, and also self versus other. You could think of another series of questions like that. Here's $20. How much do you keep for yourself? How much do you give to somebody else? I could keep it all. I could give you 1, 2, 3, and so forth. And people are free to choose, and we kind of look at those other regarding preferences as well. And there's a big norm of share of the 50-50 split there. But that's not my topic for today. I want to talk about risk preferences. So seasonal effects are widely noted in medicine and psychiatry, and there's been some suggestion that there's implications from financial markets. We're going to focus on the number of daylight hours. There are, of course, other seasonal effects to think about, but you can see how the length of days, hours of daylight varies in different locations. This dark line with the most extreme variation is Alaska, Denmark, Maryland, and Arizona, flattening it out. These are all in the northern hemisphere, of course. So days are longest in late June. So this topic, basically from psychology or psychiatry and medicine, we find that a lot of things change with the daylight length. Our well-being or our affect, how we feel, our appetite, cognition, maybe lethargy and depression show up. And it's can has been shown to impact what people might call the quality of decision making. In finance, people have said, well, we see fluctuations in aggregate market returns associated, they claim, with daylight length, the number of hours of daylight. And of course, in medicine, we have these ideas of seasonal affective disorder, or something that is maybe more widespread, but much milder than true depression, but they call subsyndromal SAD. And the SAD itself, we believe, affects about 10% of the population, and maybe at the mid-Atlantic latitudes like New Jersey and Maryland, 10 to 15% of the population. Larger in Alaska, maybe up to 30%. So the evidence from finance, this came from, the first paper on this came out in 2003 by Comstra and colleagues. And they said, we look around the world, and they went around the world and looked at stock indices. And you can see, based on that shape, that they're both in a northern and southern hemisphere. And they combined kind of their findings with the northern-centric viewpoints, converting the southern hemisphere to having fall in September and October. But they show these kinds of general returns. And the idea is not so much the number of hours, but actually when the daylight hours are changing rapidly, and you can see they're changing most rapidly right around this time, not here. They see excess returns in financial markets. Now, it can be, and there's a well-known phenomenon of the January effect, that this is not all due to that. There may be other things going on. And this January effect usually is associated with like the end of the year, people dealing with trading their stocks because of tax effects and things like that. So that's something different, but they're saying that as light comes back, we see higher returns as light starts to come back. So these are their results. And I'm just going to really just point to the positive number and the significance with the asterisks there being highly significant, this return effect due to SAD, except for in Australia for some reason. But pretty much everywhere else, they're finding that daylight, their SAD variable is just determined by the number of daylight hours. So they say, well, it's through SAD and depression changes people's risk aversion, which I showed you how we can elicit that. Seasonal variation can translate into in the length of day can translate into seasonal variation in equity returns, diminishing light, SAD, higher risk aversion. And Kramer was on that original paper with Comstra. She went out and said, let's try this out. She was in Toronto, so kind of north. And she said, we're going to see whether SAD sufferers are more risk averse in winter. And there are some other potential hypotheses. There's this notion of sensation seeking in psychology, and particularly for depressed individuals, compensatory sensation seeking, where you might take a risk to kind of get you roused, elevate your mood. And another researcher, not really working with depressed populations at all, but said, we find people who are kind of upbeat with positive affect take less risk. And her explanation was, you might ruin your mood if you're gambling and you lose, and that's going to be a negative. So people anticipate that and do less risk taking. So that's the opposite of what Kramer and Weber are looking into. And here's what Kramer and Weber found. So they did elicited risk preferences in summer, winter, summer, and they found that these folks, SAD and non-SAD, there's the control group, the non-SAD, were pretty close together at first. they got much wider apart in winter, and they came back together, but not quite, the next summer. And so they found evidence for their hypothesis that based on the gap in the winter. And so it does seem that there's something to that SAD sufferers will become more risk averse in winter. Now, there's a bit of a confound in this experiment, and you can see SAD sufferers did not become significantly less risk averse that summer, the next summer. And these folks became even more risk averse in that summer. It turns out, and this happens, of course, they did this right during the financial crisis in 2008 and 2009. So actually before the winter, this is when the financial crisis occurred. So if you want to attribute the changes, you have to control for some of these other effects, like, well, suddenly people may feel more anxious or worried or be poorer because of the crisis. So what I did was try and I took some data from another study, and they were going after this question of what other things could be affecting people's behavior aside from just their preferences really changing. And so they asked a lot survey questions, in addition to doing a risk elicitation, asked survey questions about how you're doing financially, those kinds of things. So we have a control that is a bit of an improvement over what the Canadian researchers did with respect to that issue. And yeah, I'll just say that. So they really want to explore preference stability. They have the same subjects come back. They did not really explore the seasonality thing at all. They neglected it. So when I realized that they had this big difference in day length, I thought, well, I need to analyze this data. So they're implementing these controls for changes in economic status, but they ignored the length of days. But they had a lot of variability, as you can see. The black is the initial session, and then people came back in the blue, sometimes when days were very short, and sometimes when they were very long. Oops, sorry. We're estimating a function here called the constant relative risk aversion, or CRRA function. We think this R thing is the measure of their risk attitude, and it can depend in this study, and of course, driven by Comstra's work on the length of days. And so if it's a bigger value, people are more risk averse. We had this representative sample of the Danish population, small, but still representative. 97 participated twice. In June, daylight was 17. Half came back when their days were more than 14 hours, half when days were less than 8. This was a really well done study with many different risk tasks per person, and they control for a bunch of different things that could change effects. These are the kinds of questions they ask. How's your financial situation compared to the past? What's your belief about the future? So people's beliefs they're trying to get at here. And the key thing that we found, I split the sample into people who came back when the days were long and when the days were short. When the days were long, the difference between the CRA coefficients wasn't very big, not significant. When they were short, it was a big and significant difference. So when they came back during the winter, but it went exactly in the opposite direction, people were less risk averse. Okay, I'm running out of time, I know. So it shows that with a representative sample, not seasonal affective disorder sufferers, you get a very different potentially result. And contrary to the financial markets hypothesis, very quickly, I also did some conditional models where we use those survey responses to figure out whether using those controls mattered. It did matter. And here's our results. You can see daylight length is this one. Daylight change, that's the rate at which daylight is changing, was significant, except the daylight change on the RE3 when we introduced the demographics. Then that did not turn up significant. But in general, strong support for the daylight and some explanatory power from state variable questions. I also hypothesized, based on the psychology literature, that people's responses to those survey questions could be affected if mood and their risk attitudes are affected. So I did a more complex multiple equation estimation, and that turned out, again, to be pretty robust to the main findings, that risk attitudes change with the seasons or with the daylight hours, but not in the way proposed for the representative sample, not in the way proposed by the finance folks. So we see the opposite effect of daylight. People become less risk averse when days are short. And so what do we think of the financial hypothesis? I'm not sure. Only 10% of the people on average suffer from SAD. So I don't think that those 10% maybe are driving the financial markets. We think that maybe a small number of people do, the marginal decision makers, but I'd be surprised if they all had seasonal affective disorder. But that's the kind of thing we need to look into. And I guess that's it. Yes. Thank you.